Welcome to the June 25th edition of the PFF Forecast. It's a middle of the dead season in sports, but not this podcast. We've got a great show. We're going to talk about the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. This is, of course, useful for fantasy players, useful for bettors, as we think about getting into that time of the year where we want to have people that the market does not accurately judge. And so we're going to talk about that. It's going to be data-driven using PFF's all coverage data, which some of you may be familiar with. Some of you will explain it to you, and it'll be great. And then the second thing we're going to do, Conspiracy Corner is coming back. It was so well received. We're doing it for a second straight episode. This is going to be a good one, I promise you. And then some baseball betting with Judah. It's going to be a great show. That's right. I'm very jealous. I'm sitting here in California now. It's a beautiful day, but Brad, you're in New York. Judah, you're in New York. You guys can bet on, there's nothing on, right? There's nothing on. There's horrible golf on. Keegan Bradley's over here taking 45 minutes to hit, shots. He's up 6. There's baseball. It's all you can do. Okay. I can't bet on this. And you guys are just, passing back winners. It kind of hurts my soul a little bit.
I mean, I'm coming off a full day of live betting baseball, living the good life. Honestly, I miss it for you. It's tough to hear that you can't enjoy in the same beauty of live betting baseball. Although my Angels
by passing back winners, it means, hey Judah, what baseball should I bet? And he tells me a pitcher over K's that I've never heard of in my entire life. But
there you go.
We're gonna ride it. We're gonna ride it, and we're gonna have a good time.
Exactly.
The bet was Tony Gonsolin over 4.5 strikeouts this evening. I actually knew the guy's first name. You did not, Brad, which makes me, a sharp on the baseball side. I placed 2 bets on baseball this year, and they have both cashed before the 5th inning has finished. Now I have Judah to thank for that, but it's all green. Okay, let's get into, we're going to talk about the most underrated wide receivers. Before we do, if you have not joined the Printing Press Discord, you absolutely should. It's totally free. It's arguably like one of the more valuable things that you can possibly have at PFF, but it is totally free. All 3 of us are in there, a great community of over 1,000 people who are talking about betting, whether it be football or Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg. And it's a great place, especially in the off season, to go find some angles to keep you entertained. So go join that. The link is in the description here on this new YouTube channel, which if you haven't subscribed to yet, please do. Helps us keep the podcast going. And it's also on Twitter if you can't find the link there. So go join that and get involved. All right, we're going to talk most underrated wide receivers. Now, we at PFF have a unique opportunity to use a lot of really, really great data. One of the things that when I was coming into really trying to use data and obviously PFF data to bet on games, you immediately learn, you train one model, and you immediately learn, obviously, the importance of the passing game. And there's a lot of components of the passing game that we measure really, really well, in particular, the quarterback. But the quarterback is, making a choice to throw the ball to one player. And as you start to dig into the different kind of decision points, who's the best quarterback, how do you measure passing games? You start to notice the second degree, which is what is happening with receivers and corners. And so, we realized that we were capturing data really, really well on targeted players. And of course, there's all these things that are happening to players that are not targeted. And so a few years ago, we started a process called all coverage. We also started a process called QB charting. We have an all route process. And so we are capturing everything about all of the receivers and cornerbacks and tight ends and linebackers as well that are happening on players that are not targeted, or on all players, and obviously the ones that are targeted as well. So that sets the context for how we're going to have this conversation in a bit of a more nuanced way, besides just saying, oh yeah, I think this guy's underrated because have you seen him play? And Judah, you've done a ton of work with this data and have used it actually to your benefit, especially over the last season. as you've structured some narratives for same game parlays and for some of your tail bets using this analysis. So I think it'll be particularly useful. We'll continue to have this conversation as the year goes on because we'll be betting with it. But I think in the off season, it's a good opportunity. So now that I've taken up my entire allotted time speaking in this podcast, I will shut up and let's kind of start with you, Judah. If you could talk a little bit about the different things that you've just used and found useful over the past couple of seasons in leveraging this data to bet.
Yeah, the first thing is this is something that Arjun and I wrote up last summer, which is the difference between man and zone coverage, which basically, and I think we actually talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I gave the analogy of like when we were talking about DeAndre Hopkins, and I was like a wide receiver in man is almost like a young pitcher who can kind of dominate with their stuff, as opposed to a zone receiver who is a guy who can win with kind of technique. But basically what we found was that man coverage kind of reflects the talent that's on the field, meaning if you've got Sauce Gardner versus, I don't know, pick your below average wide receiver, you're probably going to want to play man because if you're a defense, because man reflects the talent and Sauce Gardner is going to be a better corner and will likely shut down the receiver. Conversely, if you're a better, let's say, something I picked up a lot this season, I hit a bunch of SGPs with the Dolphins because the teams, man coverage teams against the Dolphins, against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, was a recipe for a disaster because no corners can cover those two. And you saw them have huge days. It was against the Ravens and the Lions, basically on the assumption that the disparity in talent matters a lot more in man versus zone. And I think it also kind of like when you're looking at separation numbers, which I'm sure I'll bring up a bunch throughout this podcast, that kind of does a very good job of predicting future performance. So obviously yards matters in predicting future yards and insofar as like you're looking for a stat, but also kind of how well you separate. Think of an example like Kenny Golladay, who when we have the all coverage data, we saw the guy didn't really separate at all. And it was a little bit predictable, his decline, because he can't get open and he was winning in contested catches, which previous research has kind of shown to be a fluky and less stable stat. So that's sort of the kind of framework that I use. Which is that I care more about matchups and man coverage when I know a team's going to play man, because that's just the reality. The talent is kind of muddled in zone as opposed to reflected in man coverage. And then looking at things like separation, which we have for every single play, even when the player is not thrown to you, this stuff is a big sample as opposed to just looking at kind of the targeted plays.
Yeah, just one real quick thing that you mentioned there, but I'll re-emphasize is, everyone knows that an open target is much more valuable than a target in tight coverage, but just how much so? It's more than 2x. So, you want a player that separates, right? You could be a great contested catch guy, but the proof is in the data. Like, it's way better to be open. And that's just a simple fact. So I think it's a really good kind of context setter.
I'll even add one more. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to add one more thing that I think is important also. It's not just that it's easier to get open. It's better to get open, but in man coverage, actually the targets are more predictable. So especially when you're talking about fantasy and DFS or betting even, in man coverage, we have a better sense of who's going to get targeted precisely because it's a lot easier to get open if you're a better, right, because of this talent disparity and for exactly the reasons you're mentioning right now. It also matters more when you're open in man coverage versus zone.
I would imagine too, real quick, George, before you jump in, I would imagine if a quarterback identifies the coverage and knows it's man, if a guy has a step against man, he's going to be far more comfortable just ripping it, as opposed to if he knows he's facing zone, yeah, he'll see the guy open, but he might have a quick half second of like, but is there a safety lurking? Is there, I'm saying, like it's probably also a mentality thing for the quarterback as well.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing that you can indirectly measure. So one of the things that in our quarterback charting process that we look at is whether a quarterback makes a throw in rhythm. And I think one of the biggest things with a quarterback, if they don't know, they don't recognize the coverage, the chances that they're not going to be able to make a lot of throws in rhythm are going to increase, right? And so you see the quarterbacks that are making the most throws in rhythm are, this might surprise you, but are players who, are smartest and sharpest at the line of scrimmage. You saw, Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. That was actually one of the big things that Aaron Rodgers all of a sudden kind of turned around when he had those 2 MVP seasons, was all of a sudden he had such a command for the offense and what he was seeing across on the other side, and it paid off. Okay, let's get into some of the most underrated wide receivers. So what's the right criteria here? Everyone knows that Jamar Chase is awesome. Everyone knows that Justin Jefferson is amazing. But who are the players that are not getting enough love? And if we know anything about wide receivers, it's that most of them probably think that they should be on that list. Probably even the ones at the very top feel that they are slighted. But I think this would be a good conversation. So Judah, why don't we start with you and just kind of go around and throw out our favorites until we've got a good list of the most underrated receivers in the league.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with Chris Olave. Maybe I'm building in a little bit of projection, but I think this guy might be a top 5 receiver in the NFL, at least when we're having this conversation in a year from now. And I choose him precisely because I think he does everything really well. I'm of the belief that target share is a lot bit on the receiver. I call it earning targets. He, like, his targets per route run last year was 29%. I think that was 3rd in the NFL, and he wins at each stage of the play. He can beat man coverage. His man's yard per route run was 2.46. In zone, it was 2.54. He separates at an elite clip against both man and zone. He's obviously one of the best deep wide receivers in the league. He's a guy who can win after the catch in the red zone, and every data point backs him up as a terrific wide receiver. And I don't think maybe it's because he was a rookie and obviously he had Andy Dalton throwing to him. But I think when we have this conversation in a year from now, Chris Olave will be a top 5 guy.
I'll tell you this, you find good beat writers and guys you can trust. I think Nick Underhill with the Saints is probably as good as it gets. Every tweet of his after camp is like, Chris Olave is going to be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And people are going to start talking about it like very early in this season. So I think you're onto something there. So you mentioned the criteria, George. This guy is probably more of a known name, but I think for me, the why he falls in this bucket is if I asked you, your 49ers, name your favorite weapons on the Niners, I think he's the 4th name that most people bring up, right? You hear, oh, George Kittle's the best tight end in the NFL. Oh, Deebo Samuel's elite. Oh, Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the NFL. Oh, and there's this guy, Brandon Ayuk. So what I love here, too, is he does show up well. He shows up better against zone in Judah's data you were talking about earlier. He's also top right corner of the metric, or of the graph, I should say, against man as well. But what I like, and we do this at PFF, and I think honestly is my favorite part of what we do here, is you can marry the data, the pure raw data, with the grades and the film stuff too, to get an even better picture. So if you just go in our ultimate package and look at, we chart when a guy is open, wide open, it's tight coverage, a step of separation, or I think just covered, right? And you simply just filter to open and wide open. And Brandon Ayuk is top 5 in the rate of receiving snaps where he gets charted as open or wide open. So maybe it kind of captures some things that, again, like maybe, the amount of yards he's open over a long haul might look differently, but you can just watch those clips too. And you watch the first 20, 30 of them, and he's just like wide, butt naked open. I think he is an underrated receiver. I think he'd be a number 1 guy on a lot of football teams. And honestly, separate kind of tangent, but it's going to be fascinating what they do. The guy needs a massive contract next offseason, most likely. And they're obviously not a cheap team. Bosa is about to get a huge deal. He, I think, is a fascinating, a couple years ahead of him, because I think he's a dog. And I think we don't talk about him enough, frankly.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, the reason for this, and I know this because I was early. Eric started saying this, and I love it, which is, never wrong, just early. And hopefully you're only early by a couple of weeks, see me and Pittsburgh Steelers a few years back, but sometimes you're early by a year. But I was early on the Ayuk kind of over Deebo Samuel thing. And I, feel pretty strongly that while Deebo is a household name and he's amazing, the best receiver on that team is Brandon Ayuk. And I would, I think what Shanahan, he gets a lot of credit, but he should get credit for what he's done with Ayuk, which was really taught him a lesson. It's like, hey, buddy, like, you got to come in here and work. You've got to be on your A game. And I think he has been since that wake up call. And like, we're seeing it this offseason. So I'd expect him to get off to a really, really good start. You saw this in the data, but you also saw this watching Niners games, especially in the red zone. The guy was, to your point, butt naked, open. every single time in the red zone. Now, he didn't get the ball every time because they had a very, very large number of options. But yeah, I think it's a good one. Okay, so my first guy is going to be a player who I think used to be a guy that would not have qualified for this conversation, but because he got paid, because then he got traded, and because he played on a team that had a putrid offense last year, particularly throwing the football, he has become, I think, a forgotten name. And this is Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is amazing as a route runner. Okay. And it shows up in the data. I love this. Of the top, I think it is 20. This is top 18 players in 2022. This is actually something that Judah tweeted out just a few days ago, but it caught my eye. Top 18 guys in targets per route run. The highest man separation grade belonged to Amari Cooper. And it was like not particularly close. He is like a full standard deviation, like to the right of basically everyone else in how he separates versus man. Now, he has been a little bit more of a guy that you just don't find showing up against zone. I think a lot of that is the offense kind of stinks and they need to sort of figure it out over there in Cleveland. But against man, he is elite, 2.64 yards per route run against man. And you saw this. Dwayne McFarland used to call this out, actually. Anytime that they were facing a team, the Browns were, that played heavy man coverage, it was, time to go start and fire up Amari Cooper and bet his overs. And, that was something that I profited on quite a bit. So he's my first guy on this list. I think we have a pretty good trio so far, but let's see if we can tap a few more guys in there. Judah, anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I guess I'm going for the tier of like guys that everyone knows are good, but I think are a little bit better than that. I'm going to go with Devonta Smith here, who may be overshadowed a bit by AJ Brown, but like we should not lose sight of how dominant he's been in 2 years. He's got a 77.6 PFF grade in his rookie year, 81.1. The dude was 10th in WAR last year among receivers. And again, he's a type of guy who can win in multiple ways. He shows up very highly in our separation metrics. I think it was like 25th in grade, and also is one of those guys who has a decent ADOT, but at the same time can win after the catch. And usually we see in kind of inverse relationship. I think a Deebo Samuel, who like by far leads the league in yak, but also has an extremely low ADOT. That tends to be true. So Devonta Smith is really not one of those guys. And again, he can win in multiple ways. He's really an elite separator, an elite route runner. I think that kind of shows up on the film, and he's produced. And I think like we kind of lose sight of the fact that like he's a really dominant receiver.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure.
And I like what's interesting about the Eagles, just real quick, is that I think you could make a case that AJ Brown could be mentioned in this conversation. He is so dominant when he's on the field. I think we really saw it start to emerge last year with Philadelphia. But you hear about the Bengals guys all the time, right? Higgins and Jamar Chase in terms of the best duos, receiving duos in the NFL. I think the Eagles guys belong in that conversation, and I think we're going to see that happen this year.
Yeah, AJ Brown. I had a good data point from Dave Solfaro this past week. He's been top 7 in receiving grade against single coverage 4 years in a row, and he was like first twice, second 1 year, and set like he's dominant and physical and like a different breed. I guess another guy that honestly is a name, but I think again will maybe get lost in the shuffle a little bit because there's a shiny new toy in Jackson Smith and Jigba, and obviously everyone knows about DK Metcalf. But Tyler Lockett is top 15 in both against man and against zone in the metrics you've shared since 2019, Judah. And the guy just too, like the acrobatic over the shoulder stuff, the catching balls through traffic, like the footwork, staying in bounds, toe tap, all that stuff, like the fine arts and the detail. He probably has some of our favorite highlights every single season. And I think just somehow gets lost in the shuffle of being like, yeah, look, maybe he's not going to be a 1,500 yard, 12 touchdown guy, but he just gets open consistently, has been good for, all the Geno comes in, no slowing down for him at all, playing through injuries pretty much the entire year last year, and was still very productive. I think he just kind of goes under the radar a little bit.
Borderline. And we're really borderline of underrated right here. DK, I would say, is one of like, and I agree what you're saying, which is from like kind of a national publicity standpoint. DK is probably one of the most popular players in the NFL especially amongst the younger generation. Which is certainly one that like cares a lot more about the player and their personality and like all those things. But I think, Brad, that's borderline. I'm gonna give it to you, but I think it's borderline. My next one, maybe this is borderline too, but I think again, a guy that has probably fallen off the radar, but I think we've talked about him before. We certainly have, poised for a really impressive return because of the quarterback that he's got. And that's Calvin Ridley, a guy that has separated at an elite level. I just go back to the year before, after Julio left, and he was, in some people's opinion, the guy that was going to break out. I think fantasy players were considering drafting him as the number one wide receiver, that year. I mean, it was a little overblown, but the reason for that was because he separated at such an incredible level. He did that in college. He then did that in the NFL. And I think he's young enough, to overcome. I would like to understand what he's been doing in the offseason. I hope that was like training and improving his game and whatnot, because that's what would worry me about this. Is obviously the data goes back to when he was playing, and he hasn't played for a while. But this is a guy that has been kind of consistently, and over the past 3 years, top 5 really in separation grade, both versus zone and versus man. And so I think a guy that, as long as his mind and his body is right, you talk about Chris Olave, Judah, like I think he's a guy that, Calvin Ridley, again, that we could be talking about as a top 10 receiver at the end of this year.
Yeah, I like that one. Just bet is over receiving yards, actually.
What was that?
I got it 800. Yeah, I think it was one of those where
is like, I feel like also somewhat underrated. And so, but there's like, it's not like he's got to compete with a bunch of guys over there.
Yeah, it's also not like he's never been the like number one guy. Like he always had Julio Jones in Atlanta. He's kind of still produced. And like 800 is not a lot of receiving yards, especially in a 17-game season with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. We can stay tuned. I think I wrote that up in a forthcoming article on PFF.com.
Yeah, we'll go to it. Before we get to, and let's see if we get one more kind of around here, but before we do, a reminder that just because it's the off season does not mean that you cannot get your football itch scratched, and you can head over to DraftKings to play some of the best ball that is available out there. I think people have maybe forgotten, maybe you've been sleeping on it because it's a sports book now, but DraftKings has been one of the best in providing obviously daily fantasy, and now is doing the same with best ball. So if you're new to best ball, which I don't think many of our audience will be, but if you are, it is basically a way to play fantasy football without the in-season roster management. You draft your team, and then the best players with the most points automatically count towards your total each week. And you can play in these big contests with millions of dollars. The DraftKings Best Ball has $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes up for grabs. So it's a fantastic way to go kind of get yourself ready for the redraft leagues that you have, understand where people are valuing different players, and win some big cash as well. It's the biggest best ball contest that you can enter today, and you can enter it at DraftKings, the DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest. Snake draft team to victory. Teams with most points at the end of the season will have a shot to take home $1 million in the top prize. Head to DraftKings app and sign up with code PFF. Join the DraftKings $10 million best ball tournament and get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars. So the way that works is you use promo code PFF, you sign up, and then you get that first deposit or whatever it is that you put into that best ball tournament. You get that entry back, and then you can go, bet it or do whatever you want. That's with promo code PFF on DraftKings and the DraftKings app. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1 per customer. Opt-in required with $10 entry fee. Bonus issued in 10 DraftKings dollars. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com/promotions for details. This ends 7/14/2023. All right. Last one. Judah, who's the last underrated guy?
Yeah, this is a guy who, when someone asks you at a bar, you like work at PFF, who's the like really underrated receiver, the guy I've never heard of that kind of is just like popping. This actually did happen right before a week 18 game in which this receiver, Khalif Raymond, actually had a huge catch against the Packers, helped the showdown squad. But this is a guy who is elite in our separation metrics. You're looking at the names, Stephon Diggs and Cooper Kupp and Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb. Right up there with him is Khalif Raymond. And this is not a guy who's kind of like a fluke one-off thing. He's been doing this every year that he has enough snaps to qualify at the top of our leaderboard. And he was number one in our separation metric. This is a guy who is absolutely elite separating in man. It'll be very interesting to see if he can kind of jump on this opportunity as we've kind of talked about the vacuum of targets for the Lions. Definitely one I'm interested in. And this dude absolutely pops kind of out of nowhere.
What are the odds, dude? What are the odds? So if the people that are watching the video, I just had a reaction because that was, and even after George gave me shit for Lockett, which was fair, I was like, all right, I'll pull one really deep out of the woodwork that no one is going to mention. I mean, great shout. I wrote an article about him in 2021 free agency. He was a restricted free agent, but they didn't tender him. And I was like, why did the Titans not give a tender to Khalif Raymond? Again, you mentioned like, you got to kind of like strip sample sizes down if you go that far back, but he was 6th in yards per reception on the 6th longest ADOT. He was, like you said, just an explosive player. I don't have one anymore because that was my pick as well. And I do hope he can make the most of. No, that was my guy. I'm not going to pull it out of thin air. I'm just shocked that Judah and I were both thinking Khalif Raymond there.
That's right. Great minds think about Khalif Raymond.
There you go.
That's how the saying goes, right?
That's how you know we talk a lot behind closed doors. I have I'll make up for you, Brad, by giving two. One, which is a guy that I think qualifies or doesn't qualify for this, similar to DK Metcalf, but still doesn't get enough love, and that's Terry McLaurin, a guy who continuously separates, a guy continuously earns targets, plays like every snap, right? Does not get injured. And what I like about him is that he's so versatile. He picks up yards after the catch, but he also goes down the football field. We talk about this a lot. Debo Samuel, like his average depth of target's like, under 6 yards, things like 5.3 or something like that. And he's a yak monster, right? And then you have guys who are, going down the football field, but they're not, they're not getting as many yards after the catch. You think of like Mike Evans. I think, Chris Olave had a pretty deep average depth of target. Last year is a good example here, but Terry McLaurin really sits in that space where he's doing both. And, I think kind of similar to a Jalen Waddle, who I think gets a lot of love, but a guy like Terry McLaurin does not and deserves some. And then here's a guy who I think people have written off because he drops the ball left and right and has had poor quarterback play. And actually, I think this is a very interesting one to bring up because of the first guy I brought up, which is Amari Cooper. Everyone remembers he had like 19 drops, was his first season or second season. Like, this is a nightmare. Drops are not a stable metric. What is stable, as Judah's pointed out, is can you separate and can you separate versus man? And the guy that can do that is Jerry Jeudy. So if fit Russell Wilson can start putting the ball in the kind of stratosphere of his receivers, if Sean Payton gets that offense turned around, Jerry Jeudy, I will promise you this, will be open. And I think he catches more passes than he did last season by a pretty significant order of magnitude. So that rounds out my my list of underrated guys. Let's just really quickly, who's the most underrated out of this group?
Well, now I have a late entrant, and then Terry McLaurin. If Tyler Lockett didn't count, Terry McLaurin definitely didn't count. So I'll just get that out there real quick. So I should have thought of this one. Our guy Deontay Hardy, who basically didn't play last year. Judah, he's the original Rashid Shaheed. He's your mom and pops Rashid Shaheed.
Yep.
In 2021, among receivers with 50+ targets, he was top 10 in both targets per route run and yards per route run. I think he's going to be a fun, exciting, explosive player in Buffalo. But anyway, I'll vote Khalif Raymond of the group we did originally. He's a fun player.
He is. I think it's got to be Khalif Raymond because no one even knows that name. People on this podcast will know who Khalif Raymond is, but to your point, Jude, if you go to a bar and you mention Khalif Raymond, no one's gonna have a clue. Can we bet? You can't. They probably don't even have a line for him. Yeah, that's the true test, right? You're underrated. That means you don't have Vegas hasn't even bothered to put a line out for you. Okay, we've got Conspiracy Corner. We had a great Conspiracy Corner last week. If you want to go check it out, it was on whether or not people are actually placing these absurd like bet 500,000 to win $50 bets under Wembanyama. Since then, I have like come into like 2 like real situations of this actually happening, which is just so funny, and I can't believe these morons exist. But they do. And so we have a new one. It's going to be very good. And before we get to it, something that you will be interested in, especially if you are a parent. None of us here are parents yet, but Brad and I were talking about, getting dogs. And so if you're getting a dog, you're thinking about getting a dog, you're certainly thinking about a kid at some point. It's, a gateway drug. So when you are a parent, you should probably be considering your child's well-being. And if you want to give them everything they need to grow and thrive, both now and in the future, you might want to consider term life insurance. I got to be honest with you, as someone that doesn't have a kid, I have not thought about it yet. But when I hear it, it sounds like something that is going to take way too much time and I'm not going to understand. The good news is that's no longer the case, thanks to Fabric by Gerber Life, that will help protect your family and secure their future, but also not confuse you and take forever. The nice thing about this is you can go use their app. It's designed by parents for parents, and it takes less than 10 minutes. And if it takes less than 10 minutes, you can fit it into your schedule, I promise you. So go check it out. It is very easy. You just simply, all you have to do is go to Gerber Life, download the app. It's very easy. You download the Fabric app by Gerber Life, take the 60-second quiz to find out if term life insurance is right for you. And in just 10 minutes, you can be ready. And you can find this whether downloading the app or just go to fabric.com/forecast. That's fabric.com/forecast, FORECAST. And here's the thing. I said this last week and I tried to get it out without laughing. I will do it this time. It is Meet Fabric. I messed that up. Meet Fabric, MEET, not MEAT, MEET, fabric.com/forecast, FORECAST, to get started. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company and distributed by Gerber Life Agency LLC. Use Fabric Technologies. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. For more information, visit us at meetfabric.com/forecast. All right, Conspiracy Corner. So the topic for this week's Conspiracy Corner takes us back to the NBA draft, but a different topic. So the first 3 picks had been basically slotted in. Everyone everyone knew obviously Wembanyama was going to go number 1. And then Brandon Miller was the enormous favorite to go number 2. And then Scoot Henderson was the favorite to go number 3. And we're going along. It's been a pretty boring NBA draft betting, ecosystem because of this. There's not kind of a lot going on. Woj has been sending, his messages about Brandon Miller, very much, using as strong of language as he can, which is, he just comes up with different words that basically mean this team is going to pick this guy. And he does a very good job of that. And I would say, was it mid-morning-ish, Brad, that Shams tweeted out? And Brad, if you can pull up the tweet so you can read it to us. But Shams basically tweets out, and something that is, I would say, a little un-Shams-like. He provided some information that was to the contrary of Brandon Miller going number 2. So Brad, I'll let you kind of read out that tweet and then give any additional context, and we can dive into what we think the tweet was all about.
Yeah. Also, shout out me for just finding it after he tweeted every single pick in the draft. All right. So here's the tweet. And I also should say real quick, I think the issue too is the amplification of he went on McAfee like half an hour after the tweet too. So anyway, who also worked for FanDuel, but we'll get there. So here's the tweet. Sources. Scoot Henderson is gaining serious momentum at number 2 with the Charlotte Hornets in tonight's NBA draft. Hornets have been torn over the last week between Henderson and Alabama forward Brandon Miller. Team has final meetings today to settle on decision. Like you said, there are different levels of insiders. This isn't a value statement. Some guys are more speculative. Some guys literally just put out facts and nothing else. Shams generally falls into that second bucket.
Yeah, he's generally a facts guy. Good context. So he went in on McAfee as well and talked about that again. Some of the comments were pretty funny. It was like, Shams has been lost since he started going on the Kay Adams show. People kind of all fun and games. But afterwards, obviously the odds change. People see that and get all of a sudden excited to bet Scoot Henderson at plus money. So ostensibly a reason for people to go in and bet a guy who ended up obviously not getting picked. Brandon Miller got picked. And here's the interesting piece. Woj, on the endless hours of ESPN coverage leading up to the draft, did not go back on his take at all. He continued as strong as he had the entire time. There was no like wavering, right? He came on, he said he hammered it. He said they have been zoned in, isolated, whatever word you want to throw out there. And he kind of doubled down on it. So the question is, the conspiracy corner topic is, do we think there was any sort of funny business, implicit, explicit, going on with Shams, who obviously is a part of the FanDuel family, goes on the Kay Adams thing. I think he might even have his own show or something there. He's somehow kind of paid by FanDuel. Let's start with you, Judah. What did you make of the situation? What do you think about Shams here?
I don't think it's possible that there'd be any funny business between Shams and FanDuel. Like the risk is just way too much for how much more money are they going to make on the draft after this? Like, this is a multi-billion-dollar company where this is exactly the kind of story where it leaks that there was some funny business that you might see some serious regulation. There's no way. The risk is just way is much greater than the reward.
Yeah, so I agree 110%. I think it's worth talking about. It is interesting. I mean, the articles that put out of hey, I emptied my bank account, that's you shouldn't do that. There's not certainty in these markets, so I don't have a ton of sympathy, but I get why it's being covered. I do want to say though, in the petty war of insiders, I think Woj may put out the greatest tweet in the history of sports coverage. So his tweet after the pick happened, but I think it also kind of throws gas in the fire of our conversation. He said, and I quote, "All along, the entire Charlotte Hornets organization has been all in on Brandon Miller, ownership, front office, scouts, coaches. They all see him as a perennial future all-star player." So yes, part of everything is just dunking on Shams, but also it does again question Shams probably just got a bad source or who knows what happened there. But it did kind of throw a little bit more gas on the fire of the entire situation. But anyway, I agree with Judah. It's kind of the messy part of having an insider that works directly for a sports book, but I think the juice is not worth the squeeze, at all, really.
The juice is definitely not worth the squeeze, but we talk about this with our bets all the time. Don't coach your bets, right? Oh yeah, this team should pass the ball more. Okay, well, I'm going to bet them this week because they're going to pass the ball more, right? It don't work out that way, right? People make stupid decisions all the time, left, right, and center. So let me just put out, some facts to consider here, Judah. See if I can get you, thinking about this a little bit more.
With Tom Brady?
What'd you say?
Tom Brady is somehow going to be involved in this conspiracy.
We'll find a way. We'll find a way. I'll see if I can work that in. But here's the thing. Okay, so Shams has been trying to unseat Woj for quite some time. The tack that he has taken has been one where he is not wrong. The person that has been wrong in the past has been Woj. There is no reason for Shams. I would say is winning in the court of public opinion, right? He's been winning on social media. All he has to do is continue to do what he's done in the past, which is only put out facts. Okay. If he has great sources, and by all accounts does have great sources, then you're telling me that he gets one bad source in the Charlotte Hornets organization, and he is not thorough enough with that one source that he isn't triangulating it and saying, okay, well, I need at least a couple more before I put something like this out. Brandon Miller's minus 900, minus 1,000 at this point. You're going to want to roll. The other thing that I'll mention is, these draft marks are getting bigger, right? People are betting more and more on on drafts, especially at the top. And drafts are a place where the sports book, unlike in other situations during live games and all that stuff, where the sports book has a much bigger edge, this is a place where the sports book does not have as big an edge. Individual bettors are finding out information in a lot of cases before the sports book, right? And so ultimately this, they're able to profit. We talk about this all the time. Drafts are an incredible place to bet. Wish that, the limits were higher, but it just does not square to me, Judah. There's just there are a lot of things where this feels and looks different. Would you at least concede that this is a very different Shams tweet than we have seen in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete break from the past. But honestly, you're leading me to think of a counter conspiracy, which is that maybe there's something funny going on between Woj and the Hornets. And he's saying, look, I've been wrong this whole time. Maybe feed me one here and then have your guy tell Shams something totally different. Maybe that's what's happening here.
Yeah, because so last year he had Banchero third, and he had was it Jabari Smith, I think, first, and those obviously I believe were flipped, which I think also fed the fire too. People were just betting, assuming Woj was wrong again. I thought you were going to say, Judah, maybe the conspiracy of the league itself being like, all right, everyone's going to tune in for the first pick, see Wembanyama, and then turn the TV off and go watch elsewhere. And like the NBA draft's never going to be the level of the NFL draft. It's just like, even like basketball fans probably know the first 5 names, and then we start getting into, I mean, even this year, the Wembanyama's teammate was like 7th overall pick. I never heard his name in my life, but so, you know, I'm sure he's a great player, but Mets 92 legend, whatever his name was. So yeah, I just think that's a conspiracy as well. Like they were trying to juice some ratings. Like there's so many favors and so many reasons why you could probably argue it made sense to do. But at the end of the day, I think we're probably just, I don't know, we're living in a conspiracy world. I can tell you this, of all the info you get on injuries or contracts, whatever, the draft is always going to have the most smoke by a billion kajillion miles. I almost think it's interesting if I'm Shams level, it's the 2nd overall pick. Everyone knows Wembanyama's first. I would just call that agent. He maybe wouldn't tell you, but like the agent for Brandon Miller probably knew he was going 2nd overall hours before the draft, right? And like I would imagine Shams has connections with all those guys. But yeah, anyway, it is weird. It is weird.
I like your take actually on the conspiracy angle with Woj. Woj has a lot of pull. ESPN has deep pockets. ESPN, now I'm starting to think this is more likely. ESPN just took McAfee from FanDuel. Okay. They're coming hard, right? They don't want, I think ESPN at some point is going to get into the sportsbook game. We don't know how or why. There've been rumors that they're going to buy DraftKings, that have gone back, or they're going to merge with them or something or other. But, there is a battle there, and, taking that guy down a peg is certainly worthwhile for them. Right. And so there's a lot of power there. I like that quite a bit. I'll say this on the Shams thing. I ultimately was trying to get, you guys riled up a little bit. I don't think there was anything explicit, right? Your point, Judah, is tremendously on point, which is there is just no way, shape, or form that there is any sort of conversation going on between the people that are running the FanDuel Sportsbook and Shams that is like, hey, buddy, can you put out a tweet that like says this? Like, there's no way, shape, or form, right? There's no chance. In fact, I actually think it goes the other way, which is like, that probably, I think that could have hurt them, because anyone that was willing to put like real money down is immediately going like, wow, Miller was we did this in the NFL draft. Miller was minus 1,000. Now he's like minus, 150, 200. I don't know what he got to. I'm going to go bet Miller, right? You hear Woj say that much more strongly than Shams did. You go bet Miller. But what I think is interesting is, is there some kind of implicit, wanting to have a narrative that's a little bit different? Because if you are right, that is a huge kind of win for you and your team, and obviously you're the company that you work for. I just think it's an interesting thing that is in the back of people's minds, and it now becomes a lot more important, right, when people are putting their money on the line, whereas before they were just you were just wrong, right? And now it's like, hey, you told me this, and then I kind of listened to you, and now I've lost, and you're working directly for the sportsbook, right? And so I think it'll be very interesting what we see some of these guys that are working, either with or in somehow connected to, sports betting. I think you've just got to be more diligent, right? And you've just got to, if you're a news person, you just got to be right every time. And so I do think we get a lot less of the hypotheticals and a lot more of the, I'm reporting this first as someone that has, heard the news officially, but you're going to get a lot less of the speculation. That's my take on kind of the ramifications of this, because it's not worth it. To your point, Gio, it's not worth it at all to any of these companies, right? That tweet is just, not worth in any way, shape, or form the way that it could potentially rile people up. All right. Any baseball bets to get us out of here?
Yeah, got one for tonight. No futures, but I guess that is not going to help the press so much, since this will probably come out during the game. But we're going to go with Tony Gonsolin over 4.5 strikeouts. I got it plus 110 on FanDuel. Astros in general, a team with a pretty low strikeout rate, but they have got 5 guys in the lineup with the strikeout rates greater than 25%. Gonsolin's not a huge innings eater, but still, even if he pitches, 5-6 innings tonight, with a higher strikeout lineup for the Astros, I like this bet.
Well, I've been a lifetime fan of his for 40 minutes. Tony Gonsolin.
Do you have your jersey ready?
Yes.
This is a last plug for joining the printing press. If you want to know about that bet, go join the printing press Discord, and you'll be able to profit, hopefully, on Tony Gonsolin. Obviously, people will be listening to this. He's either hit it or he has not. But if you don't want to wait for the podcast and be able to get those bets, you should go join the Discord. Hope you guys have a wonderful Sunday. Thank you all. Love y'all. Peace.